Today, we're going to be talking about ISAs and why they should typically form a fundamental part of your financial planning in the UK. Okay, so to start off with, as you will all know, or hopefully you will know by now, an ISA is a tax-free solution in which you can save up to £20,000 per annum on an ongoing basis. Now, ISA stands for Individual Savings Account, and this was opened up from the UK government in 1999. The first annual allowance was £7,000. This has now gone up to £20,000 over the course of the years. In fact, the £20,000 has actually been on hold since around 2019, so we haven't seen any increase in that. Now, when it comes to ISAs though, it's very important to understand there are two different types of ISAs. You can have a cash ISA. A cash ISA is an extremely simple product. You go to your high street bank, typically Barclays, NatWest, Halifax, etc. You put the money inside the account and they offer you a fixed rate of return, typically for a time period. Now, some of these fixed ISAs will actually allow you to do 1, 2, 3, or even up to 5 years as a fixed term. The other side of the equation, you have what's referred to as a stocks and shares ISA. Now, a stocks and shares ISA is exactly what it says on the tin. The UK government did a good job in the way they named it. Inside the ISA account, you're able to buy stocks and shares, which basically means you can buy mutual funds, ETF, passive tracking, active, whatever you want to put inside it. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Dominic, right now, obviously we're filming in 2024, an ISA is offering 4 or 5%. Yeah, that's a fantastic deal. Compared to a stocks and shares ISA, we don't know what the return is going to be with that. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. What we have to look at though is the long-term trend of the financial markets and the equity markets. And what you also have to ask yourself is, when the bank is offering you a guaranteed return of 5% on an ISA, why is that? When previously, a couple of years ago, they were offering you 1% on the same ISA. In 2024, are you suddenly 4% better off than you were 3 or 4 years ago? The answer is no, really, because it all comes down to inflation. If you look at the level of inflation in the UK at the moment, it is far above 5%, and I've just picked 5% off the top of my head. That's some of the best rates available on the market at the moment. Inflation is far above 5%. So if inflation, let's say running at 10%, you're investing your money and you're getting a guaranteed return of 5%. You are unfortunately, once inflation is taken into account, you are guaranteeing to lose yourself 5% a year, in my professional opinion. Now, obviously, if you leave the money in cash and you don't do anything with it, you're losing 10% a year to inflation. So getting a 5% guaranteed ISA is far, far better than doing nothing with your capital. You may also need a cash ISA because maybe you don't have a long investment timeline. You want to keep the money invested for maybe 1 or 2 years, whilst the stocks and shares ISA involves the equity markets, which should always be a minimum towards like a 5-year mindset. However, on the other side of the equation, with a stocks and shares ISA, if you look at the long-term return of the equity market, it far exceeds a 5% return. If we look at, for example, our balanced portfolio here at Cameron James, we have a circa, I think it's 52.4% return and a 0.21% cost on the portfolio. If you look at that on an annualized basis, that level of return is far higher than the 5%. However, the cash ISA is guaranteed and the stocks and shares ISA is not guaranteed. If you were to compare those two based on past performance, which is no guide to future performance, if you were to compare them over the course of the next 20 years, you would expect a stocks and shares ISA with a good level of equity weighting, say 60 or 65 and above, which is typically a balanced portfolio, to outperform a cash ISA. Now, in terms of annual allowance, it's really important to understand. You all know when the tax year is in the UK, or I hope you do. For any of our non-UK readers or listeners who are in the UK, it's the 5th of April each year in the UK. So that means from the 6th of April every year, your ISA allowance of £20,000 is refreshed by the UK government. So say, I mean, we've just passed it now, but say you were in March, you could actually do £20,000 in March, and then you could do a further £20,000 after the tax year has changed in April. This is something that which we help our clients with here at Cameron James, sending out email campaigns to ensure that they understand their allowance will be lost. Now, not everyone has £20,000 to top up their stocks and shares ISA with us, but it simply reminds them for the coming year as well. Now, there's also other types of ISAs available. There's the JISA, which is the Junior Individual Savings Account, which I'll cover off in a more detailed video. There's also the LISA, which is the Lifetime Individual Savings Account. One of the most important things to remember, and one of the biggest benefits of ISAs, is the fact that you do not pay tax on the growth inside these accounts. This is very different from opening up, say, a GIA or just having money inside your bank account. If you have money inside your bank account and you're fortunate enough for Barclays or whoever it is to give you a level of interest on that, that level of interest will be taxed at a capital gains rate tax in the UK, which will obviously reduce your earnings circa by 20%. Across the most of Europe is roughly 20% capital gains tax. Inside an ISA, there is no capital gains tax. So if we go back to previous examples, a cash ISA at 5%, you are taking home that whole 5% growth and it is not taxable. If that 5% were inside a GIA or in a normal bank account, you would effectively only end up with 4% gross rate, and the bank would typically deduct that capital gains tax at source. Now, with the stocks and shares ISA, if you look at the long-term return of the equity market, circa 10% per annum, you're going to lose potentially 2%. You go down to 8% from capital gains if you had that money just inside a GIA. So what this means in terms of our financial planning, if we think in terms of a hierarchy, okay? UK pension pots, they are the most tax efficient way to save your capital in the UK because A, they're free from capital gains tax. B, they're also free from inheritance tax as long as they're taken by the certain age. When it comes to an ISA though, an ISA is free from capital gains tax, but it's not free from inheritance tax. And then you have the lowest of the pile, so to speak, which is the GIA, an general investment account, or your bank account, which are neither free from capital gains tax and neither free from inheritance tax. So when it comes to financial planning with our clients, what we're always trying to help them to do each year is say, number one, can you maximize your annual pension allowance of up to £60,000 between employer and employer contributions into your SIP? I'll be doing another video on this. If you've already done that, great. Next, you would move on to maximizing your ISA allowance. Now, for many of you, this will actually be 2 ISA allowances. It'll be you and your husband or you and your wife, whoever does the financial planning in your family. So that's up to £40,000 per year that you could get into an ISA account. Again, back to the previous example, say it's March in one year, you could actually do £40,000, and from the 5th of April again, you could do another £40,000. So it's really important in terms of a hierarchy. Now, the only thing to note is, putting money inside a UK pension pot or a SIP, that money will be locked away until age 55 or age 57 at a minimum, compared to an ISA account which you can access at any time. So it's really important to understand it's not just a simple equation of, oh, I should top up my UK pension pot first. If you have a long-term horizon on that capital and you're willing to have it invested until age 55 or 57, that's most likely the most tax efficient thing for you to do. If you prefer to, maybe your timeline is not quite so long, an ISA can be better suited for you. But if you have surplus capital sitting in your bank account, sloshing around, bonuses, whatever it is, you should be maximizing your ISA allowance. Over the course of a 10-year period, you can get up to £200,000 into an ISA free from capital gains tax. Now, as long as you spend that money, or as long as you don't pass away with your estate being over 325 or 650 in a couple, you would then pay no inheritance tax on that capital. Again, this brings me on to another point that I always hark on the channel. People always think their pension pot is what they should be spending first in retirement. However, if we go back to what I just said, if you have a bank account in the GIA, which has capital gains tax and inheritance tax, you should likely spend that first. Once that money has been exhausted or you have a 6-month buffer left, next you should start spending your ISA, because your ISAs are not free from inheritance tax. There's the famous guy in the UK, the £1 million ISA, first person to get £1 million into their ISA pension pot. You should really be spending that down. And then finally, you should be spending down your pension capital, because pension capital is the most tax efficient, free from capital gains tax and free from inheritance tax. I hope this has been a useful video for you on ISAs. And remember, this is just ISAs and stocks and shares ISAs. I'll be doing a separate one on JISA and LISA. And thank you very much for your time today. And as always, take care with your UK assets.